The boardroom erupted in laughter when he called me office decor. Just another pretty thing to brighten up the quarterly meetings. 12 years of financial expertise reduced to a punchline. I smiled, stayed silent, and carefully filed away every chuckle, every smirk, every dismissive glance. They thought my silence meant submission. They were wrong. In 2 weeks, that same boardroom would fall eerily quiet as federal agents walked through those mahogany doors. Sometimes the most devastating checkmate comes from the piece everyone forgot was still on the board. My name is Amelia Rhodes, and I've spent 12 years building my reputation as one of the most meticulous financial analysts at Northbridge Dynamics. At 34, I'd seen enough corporate politics to know when to speak and when to let numbers do the talking. But nothing had prepared me for that Tuesday morning in March when everything I'd worked for became a punchline. The executive boardroom on the 42nd floor always smelled of leather and ambition. I'd presented in that room dozens of times. My quarterly reports dissected by C-suite executives who pretended to understand the intricate financial models I'd spent weeks perfecting. Today was supposed to be different, a discussion about departmental restructuring that Victor Hale, our CFO, had been pushing for months. Victor sat at the head of the table, his Armani suit as sharp as his tongue. At 51, he wore his power like cologne, overwhelming and impossible to ignore. His salt and pepper hair was slicked back, revealing a face that had perfected the art of condescension. I'd watched him destroy careers with a single raised eyebrow, reduce grown executives to stammering apologies with his calculated silences. As we evaluate our human capital allocation, Victor began, his voice carrying that practiced authority that made junior staff scramble for their notepads. We need to be honest about redundancies. I sat 3 chairs down, my tablet open to the efficiency report I'd prepared. The data was clear, our department was operating at peak performance, our error rate less than 0.3%, our audit scores consistently in the top percentile. I was ready to defend my team. The Financial Analysis Division, Victor continued, his eyes scanning the room before landing on me, has become bloated. Too many cooks, as they say. My fingers tightened around my stylus. I'd seen this before, the setup before the kill. Amelia. He said my name like it was a foreign word he'd just learned to pronounce. You've been here, 10 years? 12, I corrected, keeping my voice steady. 12. He smiled, and the room seemed to drop a degree. And in those 12 years, you've certainly been consistent. There was something in the pause before consistent that made my stomach turn. Around the table, the other executives, all men except for me and the HR director, shifted in their seats like sharks sensing blood in the water. But consistency. Victor stood, beginning his practiced pace around the table. Isn't innovation, it isn't leadership, it's decoration. The word hung in the air. I felt the heat rise to my face but kept my expression neutral. In fact, he continued, now standing directly behind my chair, I'd argue that some positions in this company exist purely for optics. Diversity checkboxes, window dressing to make our annual reports look progressive. The HR director, Sandra, opened her mouth to speak but closed it when Victor's hand landed on the back of my chair. No offense, Amelia, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. But when we're talking about essential versus non-essential roles, we need to ask ourselves, are we keeping people because they contribute or because they make the office look prettier? Someone snickered, then another. Within seconds, the entire boardroom was chuckling at Victor's clever wordplay. Even Sandra managed a nervous laugh, her eyes avoiding mine. I mean, Victor was on a roll now, feeding off the energy. If we're being honest, and we should be honest, some employees are essentially office decor. They brighten up the place, sure, but when it's time to move offices, you don't take the potted plants with you. The laughter grew louder. Mark from operations was actually slapping the table. James from legal was wiping tears from his eyes. These men who'd asked for my analysis, who'd relied on my reports, who'd taken credit for my discoveries, they were all laughing at the comparison of my 12 years of work to a decorative fern. I sat perfectly still, my face a mask of professional calm. Inside, something crystallized, hard and sharp as diamond. I looked at Victor, really looked at him, and saw not a powerful executive, but a man who'd just made the biggest mistake of his career. "You're absolutely right, Victor," I said, my voice cutting through the laughter like a blade through silk. The room quieted. Decoration does serve a purpose. It makes things appear more valuable than they actually are. His smile faltered for just a moment. "I'll have my resignation on your desk by end of day." I continued, standing slowly, gathering my tablet with deliberate calm. After all, we wouldn't want anyone to mistake this company for something more than it really is. The silence that followed was deafening. But I was already walking toward the door, my heels clicking against the marble floor with metronomic precision. Behind me, I heard Victor's voice, trying to reclaim control. "Well, that's settled then. Moving on to Q3 projections." But I knew something they didn't. In my 12 years at Northbridge Dynamics, I hadn't just been analyzing numbers, I'd been collecting them. Every suspicious transaction, every creative accounting trick, every financial skeleton in Victor Hale's immaculately organized closets. They thought I was decoration. They were about to learn that sometimes, the most dangerous piece on the board is the one that's been standing still, watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The security guard at the lobby didn't even look up as I walked past with my cardboard box. After 12 years, I'd become part of the furniture, invisible until someone decided I no longer matched the decor. My office on the 38th floor had been my second home, but I packed it in under an hour. Photo frames, a jade plant that had somehow survived despite my neglect, and a collection of financial journals that nobody else would ever read. What security didn't see, what nobody saw, was the small USB drive tucked inside the binding of my 2019 Federal Tax Code manual. Black, unremarkable, barely larger than my thumbnail. To anyone else, it would look like a forgotten piece of obsolete technology. To me, it was 4 years of insurance. I'd started collecting the data almost by accident. A discrepancy in the Q3 2021 reports that didn't quite add up. A consulting fee paid to a company that existed only on paper. Wire transfers that took curious routes through offshore accounts before landing in approved budgets. At first, I documented them thinking I'd present them to Victor, believing he'd want to know about these irregularities. Then I'd watched him personally approve a suspicious invoice, his signature bold and unmistakable on a contract for services never rendered. That's when I understood. Victor wasn't overlooking the irregularities, he was orchestrating them. So I kept collecting. Screenshots saved as encrypted files, PDF reports downloaded during late nights when the office was empty, email chains accidentally left visible on shared drives. I never actively hacked or stole. I simply preserved what was carelessly left in plain sight by men too arrogant to believe anyone was paying attention. Especially not the office decor. The USB drive contained everything. Phantom consulting firms that billed Northbridge for millions. Kickbacks disguised as strategic partnerships. A particularly creative embezzlement scheme that funneled money through our corporate social responsibility program. Victor's fingerprints were on every transaction, his authorization codes traceable through every layer of deception. Back in my apartment, I laid the evidence out on my dining table like a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. 4 years of financial forensics, organized chronologically and cross-referenced with public records. The FBI would have been impressed. But I wasn't going to the FBI. I had something more personal in mind. I pulled out my laptop and began creating a comprehensive index. Every transaction needed to be traceable, every connection crystal clear. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about precision. When this information reached the right hands, there could be no ambiguity. No room for Victor to wiggle free with expensive lawyers and plausible deniability. The irony wasn't lost on me. All those times Victor had dismissed my reports as overly detailed and unnecessarily thorough. He'd actually rolled his eyes once when I'd included 15 pages of supporting documentation for a simple budget revision. "Amelia," he'd said, "not everything needs to be documented to death." But it did. Every number told a story. And Victor had been writing fiction with Northbridge's finances for years. I worked through the night, fueled by cold coffee and hot anger. By dawn, I had a masterpiece of financial crime documentation, 300 pages of evidence, each transaction linked to source documents, each trail of money followed to its termination point. Some of it led to Victor's personal accounts, carefully disguised but not carefully enough. Some led to his friends in other companies, a network of corporate leeches feeding off each other's corruption. The most damning piece was a series of transfers from 2023, where Victor had used the company's European subsidiary to wash money through a supposed market research firm in Cyprus. That firm had exactly one employee, Victor's brother-in-law, and had somehow produced market research worth $3.2 million without generating a single report. I had the incorporation documents, the banking records, even a carelessly posted LinkedIn profile that connected all the players. As the sun rose over the city, painting the sky the color of a fresh bruise, I made a backup of everything. One copy went into my safe deposit box at a bank across town. Another was uploaded to a secure cloud server under an anonymous account. The original USB drive, the one that had lived in my tax code manual for so long, stayed with me. I thought about the laughter in that boardroom, the sound of a dozen executives finding humor in my humiliation. They'd probably already forgotten about it, moved on to the next quarter's projections, the next round of downsizing, the next person to designate as expendable. But I hadn't forgotten. And more importantly, I hadn't forgiven. My phone buzzed with an automated email from HR, confirming the receipt of my resignation and reminding me about the terms of my non-disclosure agreement. I almost laughed. They were worried I might share trade secrets or client lists. They had no idea that the real secrets were the ones they'd never meant to share, the ones they'd left carelessly scattered across shared drives and forgotten in email threads. I closed my laptop and stood up, stretching muscles stiff from hours of hunching over documents. Outside my window, the city was waking up. People were heading to offices just like Northbridge, ready to play their parts in the corporate theater. Some of them were probably decoration too, dismissed and diminished by men like Victor Hale. But I wasn't decoration anymore. I was something far more dangerous. I was someone with nothing left to lose and everything needed to burn it all down. The USB drive sat on my coffee table, innocent and devastating in equal measure. Tomorrow, I would decide what to do with it. Tonight, for the first time in 12 years, I would sleep without worrying about quarterly reports or fiscal projections. Let Victor enjoy his triumph. Let him savor the laughter and the clever wordplay. His days of treating people like disposable office furniture were numbered, and he didn't even know the countdown had begun. The diner on Morrison Street had been our meeting spot since we were kids, tucked between a dry cleaner and a failing bookstore. It was the kind of place where the coffee was terrible, but the anonymity was perfect. Claire was already there when I arrived, sitting in our usual booth at the back. Her FBI windbreaker traded for a nondescript gray sweater that made her look like any other government employee grabbing lunch. My sister had our mother's sharp features, but our father's calculating eyes. At 37, she'd spent 15 years climbing the ranks of what she only ever referred to as the Bureau. Though I knew she worked for the Financial Integrity Division, a specialized unit that handled high-level corporate crime. We'd barely spoken in the last 2 years. Not out of animosity, but from the careful distance that comes when one sibling enforces the laws the other's employer habitually breaks. "You look tired," she said as I slid into the booth. "You look worried," I countered. She smiled, that half grimace she'd perfected when we were teenagers. "I heard about Northbridge, about your resignation. News travels fast. When someone like Victor Hale starts bragging about trimming the fat at industry cocktail parties, people talk." She stirred her coffee, not drinking it. "He's telling everyone he's revolutionizing the company's efficiency metrics." "Is that what he's calling it?" Claire studied me, that investigator's gaze that could peel paint off walls. "Amelia, why did you really want to meet?" I reached into my purse and placed the USB drive on the table between us, partially hidden under a napkin. Claire's expression didn't change, but her breathing did. A slight quickening that told me she understood. Hypothetically, I said, keeping my voice low, if someone had documentation of systematic financial fraud at a major corporation, what would be the proper channels for sharing that information? Hypothetically, Claire replied, not touching the drive. That person should go through official whistleblower channels, file a report with the SEC, follow proper procedures. And if that person had reason to believe the fraud went deep enough that official channels might be compromised. Claire was quiet for a long moment. Around us, the diner hummed with mundane life. Order bells ringing, coffee percolating, meaningless chatter about weather and sports. Then, she said finally, that person might share the information with someone they trusted, someone with the authority and independence to act on it properly, someone like an older sister who happens to investigate financial crimes. That would be incredibly convenient. She pulled the napkin toward her, the USB drive disappearing into her hand with practiced ease. Of course, this hypothetical person would need to understand that once this information was shared, they couldn't control what happened next. No revenge fantasies, no personal vendettas, just justice, slow and methodical. What if this hypothetical person didn't want revenge? What if they just wanted the truth to matter? Claire's expression softened. How bad is it, Amelia? 4 years of fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, kickback schemes. Conservative estimate, 40 million in stolen funds. Maybe more. She whistled low. And Victor? His signature is on everything. His authorization codes, his personal accounts. He wasn't even particularly careful about it. Why would he be? He thought everyone around him was either too stupid or too scared to notice. Or too decorative. I looked up sharply. Claire was giving me that protective older sister look that used to precede her beating up whoever had made me cry in middle school. Mom heard about what happened. One of her book club friends works at Northbridge, in accounting. She said the whole building was talking about it. How Victor humiliated you in front of the entire board. It doesn't matter. It does matter. It makes this personal, which makes it complicated. Everything's documented, I said. Every transaction, every trail, I was careful. Claire, this isn't about my feelings. It's about criminal activity that's been bleeding the company dry while Victor jokes about cutting redundancies. Claire pocketed the drive and leaned back. You know I have to do this properly. By the book. It could take weeks before anything visible happens. I know. And you can't be involved. At all. If this goes where I think it's going, you need to be completely clean. No contact with anyone at Northbridge, no discussing this with anyone else, no social media posts about karma or justice. I just want to tend my garden and figure out what comes next. Good, keep it that way. She stood, throwing a 20 on the table. For what it's worth, Amelia, you did the right thing. Not the satisfying thing, maybe, but the right thing. Will you let me know when? You'll know, she interrupted. Trust me. Everyone will know. She left first, proper tradecraft, even for a meeting between sisters. I waited 15 minutes, nursing my terrible coffee and thinking about the weight of that tiny drive. 4 years of evidence, compressed into something smaller than a lipstick tube. Victor had called me decoration, something pretty but ultimately useless. He had no idea that the most dangerous things often came in the smallest, most overlooked packages. As I walked back to my apartment, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Then another. Former colleagues. Word spreading that I'd really quit. That it wasn't just another corporate rumor. I deleted them all without reading. That life was over now. I'd played my final card, passed the baton to someone who could run with it in ways I never could. Claire would build a case. She'd follow every lead, document every crime, construct an airtight prosecution that would stand up in federal court. It would be methodical, thorough, and devastating. And when it happened, Victor would never see it coming because he'd never imagined that the decoration he'd dismissed had been documenting his crimes all along. Or that she had a sister with the power to turn those documents into handcuffs. The irony was almost poetic. Victor had been right about one thing. I had been consistent. Consistently watching, consistently documenting. Consistently preparing for the day when someone would finally listen. Now someone was listening. Someone with a federal badge and a mandate to prosecute financial crimes. Someone who happened to share my DNA and my intolerance for bullies in expensive suits. I smiled as I climbed the stairs to my apartment. The game was in motion now, and Victor Hale didn't even know he was playing. 3 weeks passed in deliberate mundanity. I developed a routine that would have made any surveillance team die of boredom. Morning coffee at 7:30, precisely 2 sugars, no cream. Grocery shopping on Tuesdays and Fridays at the Mortons 2 blocks away. Evening walks around the neighborhood, 30 minutes exactly, always the same route. I repotted my orchids, organized my bookshelf by color instead of author, and started a sourdough starter that I named Frederick. To anyone watching, and I assumed someone might be watching, I was a woman embracing unemployed life with disturbing contentment. Mrs. Patterson from 4B stopped me in the hallway one afternoon, her Yorkshire Terrier yapping at my ankles. "Amelia, dear, you're looking so relaxed these days. Retirement suits you." "Just taking a sabbatical," I replied, scratching the dog behind its ears until it stopped its noise. "From that awful corporate place? Good for you. My husband worked himself to death for men who couldn't remember his name at the funeral." I smiled and nodded, playing the part of the burned-out executive seeking inner peace. But inside, I was counting, watching, waiting. The first ripple came on a Thursday. A text from Marcus, one of the few colleagues I'd actually respected. "Strange auditors in the building today. Never seen them before. Everything okay?" I didn't respond. Marcus texted again an hour later. "They're asking for files from 2021, 2023. Victor's losing his mind." Still, I said nothing. I was pruning my jade plant, each cut precise and necessary. By Friday, the ripples had become waves. My LinkedIn exploded with connection requests from former colleagues, all with variations of the same message. "Hey, hope you're well. Quick question, did you keep any records from your time here? Just wondering. No big deal." I archived every message without response. Saturday brought an unexpected visitor. Through my peephole, I saw Jennifer from HR, the one who'd handled my exit paperwork. She stood in my hallway for 5 minutes, hand raised to knock but never quite making contact. Finally, she left an envelope under my door and fled like she'd planted a bomb. Inside was a formal letter from Northbridge's legal department, reminding me of my NDA and offering a consultation fee of $50,000 for any assistance with routine auditing procedures. The subtext was clear: tell us what you know, and we'll pay you to stay quiet about it. I used the letter as kindling for my fireplace that evening. The flames turned the corporate letterhead into ash, which seemed appropriate. Sunday was quiet, but Monday brought the storm. My phone rang at 6 a.m., Victor's number. I let it go to voicemail. 6:15 a.m., Victor again. Voicemail. 6:22 a.m., Victor. Voicemail. 6:30 a.m., a text. "Amelia, we need to talk. Please." The please was new. Victor Hale didn't say please. He commanded, demanded, instructed, but never pleaded. I made my morning coffee, 2 sugars, no cream, and listened to the voicemails. The first was professional. "Amelia, it's Victor. There seems to be some confusion regarding some financial records from your tenure. Please call me back at your earliest convenience." The second, less so. "Amelia, this is becoming urgent. Federal auditors are asking questions that I'm certain you could help clarify. Call me." The third was barely controlled panic. "I know you're there. I know you're listening. Whatever you think you know, whatever you think you've done, we can work this out. We're both professionals here." I deleted all 3 and went for my morning walk. When I returned, there were 7 more missed calls. That afternoon, I sat by my window and watched the city below. Somewhere in those glass towers, Victor was probably in another boardroom, but this time he wouldn't be making jokes. He'd be sweating through his Armani, wondering how much the feds knew, wondering where they'd gotten their information, wondering why his calls to various government contacts weren't being returned. The truth was setting in for him, I imagined. The realization that his empire of fraudulent finances was built on sand, and someone had just turned on the tide. My neighbor across the hall, Mr. Chen, no relation to anyone at Northbridge, just a retired professor who played violin at inappropriate hours, knocked on my door that evening. "There was a man here earlier," he said, peering at me over his thick glasses. "Expensive suit, kept asking about you." I told him you were a lovely neighbor who kept to herself and always separated her recycling properly. "Thank you, Mr. Chen." He seemed very agitated, kept muttering about decorations and plants. Very strange man. I offered Mr. Chen some cookies I'd baked that morning, and he shuffled away, satisfied with his good deed of the day. That night, as I was reading a wonderfully trashy romance novel I'd never have had time for when I was working, my phone buzzed with an email. The sender was a generic Northbridge address, but the subject line was pure Victor. "You've made your point." I didn't open it. Instead, I marked it as spam and went back to my book. The heroine was about to confront the villain who'd wronged her, and I wanted to see how it ended, even though I already knew. The villain always thinks they can talk their way out of consequences until the moment they can't. Outside, the city hummed with its usual energy, oblivious to the small earthquake happening in one corner of its financial district. But I could feel it, the subtle shift in pressure that comes before a building collapse. Victor was scrambling now, trying to shore up walls that were already cracking, trying to salvage what was already lost. The beautiful thing about federal investigations is their thoroughness. They don't just look at what you point them toward, they look at everything connected to it. Every thread pulled reveals 10 more. Victor might have started by trying to explain away the transactions I'd documented, but by now, the investigators would be finding things even I hadn't known about. I finished my novel and prepared for bed, following my new routine with mindful precision. Tomorrow would bring more calls, more texts, more desperate attempts to reach me. But tonight, I would sleep peacefully in my little apartment, surrounded by my thriving plants and the comfortable silence of a life Victor Hale could no longer touch. The storm was here, and I was safely watching from shore while Victor tried to bail out a sinking ship with his bare hands. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a courier who required signature confirmation. The return address was the United States Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. Official. Federal. Inevitable. Inside was a formal notice that Northbridge Dynamics was under investigation for violations of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, wire fraud, and money laundering. The investigation period, January 2019 to present. 7 years of financial records would be scrutinized, dissected, exposed. I made myself a cup of tea and read the letter 3 times, not because I needed to understand it, but because I wanted to savor the weight of those words. 7 years. They weren't just looking at what I'd given them, they were looking at everything. My phone, which had been blessedly quiet for the past 2 days, erupted. 43 missed calls in an hour. Text messages flooding in so fast my phone froze twice. I recognized most of the numbers, board members, senior executives, people who'd laughed in that conference room just over a month ago. But the most interesting message came from an unknown number. "The ship is sinking, rats everywhere, thank you. A friend." I had my suspicions about who this friend might be. Sandra from HR, perhaps, or Marcus from my old department. Someone else who'd been designated as decoration over the years, who'd been waiting for their moment to matter. That evening, the news broke. Financial Times ran it first. Northbridge Dynamics under federal investigation for alleged financial misconduct. By midnight, it was everywhere. Bloomberg, Reuters, The Wall Street Journal. Each article mentioned that the investigation was sparked by credible whistleblower information and that the scope was extensive and concerning. Victor's name appeared in every article, always preceded by his full title, Chief Financial Officer Victor Hale. The man who'd valued his title above everything was now watching it become a millstone around his neck. Wednesday brought more couriers. Subpoenas, according to Mrs. Patterson, who'd taken it upon herself to monitor my incoming mail with the dedication of a Cold War spy. 4 men in dark suits, she reported, breathless with excitement. They looked very serious. FBI, do you think? Probably just insurance salesmen, I said, accepting the banana bread she'd stress-baked. Insurance salesmen don't have that kind of jawline, dear. By Thursday, the Northbridge parking garage, visible from my living room window if I used the binoculars I'd bought for bird watching, was noticeably emptier. Rats fleeing the sinking ship, just as my anonymous friend had said. The loyal ones would stay. Of course, right up until the water reached their necks. My former colleagues' attempts to reach me had evolved from professional to desperate to threatening. One particularly memorable voicemail from James in legal warned me about the consequences of industrial sabotage and personal liability for defamation. I saved that one. It would pair nicely with the email he'd sent in 2022, explicitly asking me to make the numbers work on a suspicious acquisition. Friday afternoon, as I was perfecting my sourdough technique, Claire called, not her personal phone, her official one. Agent Rhodes, she said formally. Is this Ms. Amelia Rhodes? Speaking. Ms. Rhodes, we'd like to inform you that your former employer, Mr. Victor Hale, is now officially under criminal investigation. We may need your testimony in the coming months. Please remain available. Of course, Agent Rhodes. I'm not going anywhere. Good. Oh, and Ms. Rhodes, you might want to watch the news tonight. 6 p.m. Eastern. At 6 p.m. sharp, I turned on the news. The lead story was Northbridge, but with a new development, Victor Hale had been placed on administrative leave pending the investigation. The board had held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously. The man who'd ruled through fear and humiliation had been dethroned in a single afternoon. But the real shock came in the B-roll footage. There was Victor, being escorted from the building by security. The same security guards who'd ignored me when I'd left with my cardboard box were now flanking him like prison guards. His face was pale, his perfect hair disheveled, his Armani suit somehow wrinkled despite being a $5,000 piece of Italian engineering. As he reached the lobby, that grand marble lobby where he'd held court so many times, someone had clearly tipped off the media. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions. And Victor Hale, the man who'd never met a microphone he didn't want to dominate, said nothing. He kept his head down and practically ran to the black town car waiting outside. But the best part, the part I rewound 3 times, was the moment just before he got in the car. He looked up at the building, at the fortress he'd thought was impregnable, and his expression was one of complete bewilderment, like he couldn't understand how decoration could have brought down the whole facade. My phone rang. Victor's number. For the first time in days, I answered. Amelia. His voice was hoarse, defeated. I said nothing. I know it was you. The FBI won't confirm it, but I know. Those reports, those transactions, only you had access to all of it. Still, I remained silent. Say something. Gloat. Tell me you're enjoying this. Something. I let the silence stretch until it became unbearable, then spoke a single word. Decoration. What? You called me decoration. Victor. Office decor. A potted plant. That was. I didn't mean. Plants are interesting things, Victor. They appear to just sit there, doing nothing, but underground, their roots spread everywhere, into every crack, every weakness. And given enough time, they can destroy entire buildings, bring them crumbling down. Amelia, please. We can work something out. I have money. Goodbye. Victor? I hung up and blocked his number. Then I went to my window and looked out at the city, at all those glass towers full of men like Victor Hale, confident in their power, careless with their cruelty, certain that the people they dismissed as decoration would never, could never, fight back. They were wrong. We were everywhere, taking notes, keeping records, waiting for our moment. And when that moment came, we didn't need to shout or storm the gates. We just needed to tell the truth to someone who would listen. The investigation was just beginning. The real destruction was yet to come. The call came at 2 a.m. on a Sunday, 2 weeks after Victor's public humiliation. My phone lit up the darkness of my bedroom with an unknown number. I almost didn't answer. But something, instinct, perhaps, made me pick up. Don't hang up. Victor's voice was different. Gone was the commanding baritone that had terrorized junior executives. This was the voice of a drowning man. How did you get this number? I still have friends. Had friends. Listen, Amelia, I need you to understand something. No. Victor, you need to understand something. It's 2 a.m. This is harassment. They froze my accounts. All of them. Personal. Business. Even my kids' college funds. My wife filed for divorce yesterday. She's taking the children to her mother's in Connecticut. I said nothing. In the darkness, I could hear his breathing, ragged and desperate. I know what you gave them, he continued. The Cyprus transactions, the shell companies, the kickbacks. But Amelia, you don't understand the full picture. There are other people involved. Dangerous people. Then you should talk to the FBI. I am. Tomorrow. Or today. I suppose. I'm turning state's evidence. Full cooperation. But that's not why I'm calling. I waited. Outside, the city slept, unaware of this small drama playing out in whispers and shadows. I'm calling to offer you something you want more than revenge, he said. I'm offering you vindication. I don't need. The board knew. Not everything, but enough. They knew about the consulting fees, the inflated invoices. They turned a blind eye because the stock price kept climbing. You weren't just decoration, Amelia. You were a potential witness they needed to discredit before you became a threat. My blood chilled. You're lying. Check your employee file, the real one, not the sanitized version HR shows. There's a note from 2 years ago, flagging you as a regulatory risk because of your excessive attention to documentation. They discussed transferring you, but I argued to keep you where I could watch you. Why would you? Because I'm not an idiot, despite current evidence to the contrary. I knew you were smart, dangerous, even, but I thought I could control you with the usual tools: intimidation, humiliation, social pressure. I was wrong. He paused, and I heard what sounded like ice clinking in a glass. Do you want to know the real reason I called you decoration that day? Enlighten me. Richard Blackwood, the board chairman, told me to get rid of you. Specifically you. He said you were becoming problematic. The decoration comment? That was my idiotic attempt to force you to resign instead of firing you. I thought if you quit, you'd just disappear. Less paperwork, less scrutiny. Richard Blackwood. I knew the name. Old money. Older connections. The kind of man who served on 6 boards and treated companies like personal piggy banks. You're telling me this why? Because when I go down, I'm taking everyone with me. The board, the senior partners who looked the other way, the whole corrupt system that made men like me possible. But I need your help. You must be joking. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not even asking you to like me. I'm asking you to help me burn it all down. Completely. The FBI has the financial crimes, but you have something more. You have the culture of it. The meetings where things were implied but never stated. The promotions that went to those who played ball. The systematic destruction of anyone who asked too many questions. I gave everything to your sister. Yes, I figured that out. Agent Rhodes is very thorough, but she can only prosecute what's illegal. What about everything that was merely unethical? The careers destroyed, the ideas stolen, the culture of fear and favoritism? He was right, and I hated him for it. The FBI would handle the crimes, but the rot went deeper than what could be prosecuted. There's a journalist, Victor continued. Sarah Morgan from the Financial Times. She's been investigating corporate culture at major firms. If you talk to her, provide context for what's about to come out in the federal case, it could change everything. Not just for Northbridge, but for every company that operates like this. And what do you get out of it? Reduced sentence, Maybe, but mostly, I get to watch Richard Blackwood and the others realize that their scapegoat grew teeth. They're setting me up to take the fall alone. Amelia, the lone bad actor, the rogue CFO, but we both know it was never just me. I stood and walked to my window. The city was starting to wake, the first hints of dawn touching the sky. Send me proof, I said. About the board's knowledge, about the decision to force me out. Real documentation, not just your word. Check your email in an hour. And Amelia? Whatever you decide to do with it, just remember, we're not so different. You and I, we both kept detailed records. We both waited for the right moment. The only difference is you were smart enough to strike first. No, Victor. The difference is I documented crimes. You committed them. He laughed, bitter and broken. Fair enough. 1 hour. Check your email. He hung up, and I stood at my window, watching the city wake. Somewhere out there, Victor was preparing to confess to federal agents. Somewhere else, Richard Blackwood was probably sleeping soundly, confident that his distance from the day-to-day operations would protect him. But Victor was right about one thing. The FBI could only prosecute crimes. The culture that created and enabled those crimes needed a different kind of reckoning. And if Victor's documents were real, if the board truly had known and conspired to silence me, then my story wasn't just about one corrupt CFO, it was about an entire system that treated people as disposable, that valued stock prices over integrity, that crushed anyone who threatened to expose its rot. 1 hour. Then I would decide whether to finish what I'd started or let the federal case run its course. Either way, Victor Hale was finished. The question was, how many others would fall with him? The morning Victor Hale was arrested, I was repotting my orchids. The news alert came through at 8:47 a.m., interrupting a podcast about sustainable gardening. Breaking: former Northbridge CFO Victor Hale taken into federal custody. The footage was everywhere within minutes. Victor in handcuffs, doing the perp walk from his Upper East Side townhouse to a waiting federal vehicle. He looked smaller somehow. Deflated. His expensive suit unable to hide the reality of what he'd become. A criminal caught in his own web. But it was what happened next that truly marked the beginning of the end. At 9:15 a.m., federal agents walked into Northbridge Dynamics headquarters. Not just a few agents conducting interviews, but a full raid. Dozens of them. With boxes and dollies, prepared to gut the executive floor. Someone inside, a brave soul with a smartphone, live-streamed it on social media. The video went viral within an hour. There was Richard Blackwood, the untouchable board chairman, being escorted from his corner office while agents boxed up his files. There was Jennifer from HR, crying as they confiscated her computer. There was James from legal, actually trying to argue jurisdiction with a federal agent who looked like she could bench press him. My phone buzzed. Sarah Morgan from the Financial Times. Ms. Rhodes, I believe Victor Hale suggested we speak. I'm downstairs with coffee and an open mind. I'd been expecting her since Victor's documentation proved legitimate. His emails had included a treasure trove, board meeting recordings where they discussed the Amelia problem, messages explicitly authorizing the fraudulent transactions, even a particularly damning video conference where Richard Blackwood told Victor to make the numbers work. I don't care how. I met Sarah in the lobby. She was younger than I'd expected, with sharp eyes and the kind of quiet intensity that suggested she'd dismantled bigger titans than Northbridge. Ms. Rhodes, I've reviewed the documents you sent. They're explosive, but I need context. The human story behind the numbers. We talked for 3 hours. I told her everything, not just the fraud, but the culture that enabled it. The casual misogyny dressed up as meritocracy. The way they'd systematically pushed out anyone who asked uncomfortable questions. The promotion committees that were theater performances with predetermined outcomes. The decoration comment, Sarah said. That's become somewhat infamous in certain circles. Several former employees have reached out to me with similar stories. It was never just about me, I said. I was just the one who kept receipts. That afternoon, As federal agents continued their raid, something extraordinary happened. Employees started walking out, not fired, not laid off, just walking out. It started with a few analysts from my old department, then spread. By 3 p.m., over 100 employees had simply packed their things and left. Marcus texted me a photo from inside. Empty desks stretching across the trading floor. Abandoned computers still glowing. "We're done being decoration," his message said. The board tried to convene an emergency meeting at 4 p.m., but they couldn't reach quorum. Half the board members were being questioned by federal agents, and the other half had lawyered up and refused to attend. Richard Blackwood, according to Sarah's sources, was attempting to flee to his estate in the Hamptons when agents stopped him at the helipad. That evening, I stood in my kitchen making dinner, a proper meal. Not the desk salads I'd subsisted on for 12 years at Northbridge. My phone rang constantly, but I ignored it. The story was beyond my control now, spreading like wildfire through the financial world. Claire called on her personal phone. "You did it," she said simply. "We did it." "No, Amelia. The FBI can prosecute crimes. What you did, exposing the culture, the systemic rot. That's what changes things. There are calls for congressional hearings. The SEC is launching a separate investigation. Other companies are scrambling to audit themselves before someone like you emerges from their ranks. Someone like me? Someone they underestimated. Someone they thought was just decoration." After we hung up, I opened my laptop and pulled up Northbridge's stock price. It had dropped 47% in a single day. Market capitalization evaporated by billions. The company that had seemed too big to fail was failing spectacularly, publicly, and irreversibly. But the final blow came in the form of an email at 11 p.m. from Victor, sent from his lawyer's office. "Amelia, by the time you read this, I'll have completed my confession. 14 hours of testimony. I gave them everything: names, dates, amounts, methods. The board, the auditors who looked the other way, the regulators we bribed. It's all over. You were right about plants. They do destroy buildings. But sometimes the building needs to be destroyed for something better to grow. I'm looking at 20 years, minimum. My lawyer says cooperating might reduce it to 12. Either way, my life as I knew it is over. The irony isn't lost on me. I spent my career moving numbers around, making things appear more valuable than they were. But I never saw the true value sitting right in front of me. You weren't decoration, Amelia. You were the foundation. And I was too arrogant to notice until you brought it all crashing down. Victor?" I deleted the email and closed my laptop. Tomorrow, Sarah's article would run. The congressional hearings would begin within weeks. Northbridge would either restructure completely or collapse entirely. Richard Blackwood and his fellow board members would face their own reckonings. But tonight, I sat in my apartment, surrounded by my thriving plants, and felt something I hadn't experienced in 12 years at Northbridge. Peace. Complete. Absolute peace. The decoration had won. And now, finally, I could stop being what they'd tried to make me and return to being who I'd always been. Someone who paid attention, who kept records, and who knew that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is wait for exactly the right moment to show everyone what you've seen. The call came at dawn, 3 weeks after the arrests. I'd been awake anyway, watching the sunrise paint my apartment in shades of gold and amber. The caller ID showed a federal detention center. Amelia. Victor's voice was different now, not broken, not desperate, but somehow lighter. Victor. I wanted you to know, the final count, 47 arrests, 231 years of combined sentences, the board, senior management, even the external auditors who signed off on our cooked books. It's done. How does it feel? Like watching a building I spent 20 years constructing burn to the ground, and realizing I was the one who'd been spreading gasoline the entire time. There was a pause. I could hear institutional sounds in the background, metal doors, distant voices, the hollow echo of confined spaces. You know what the strangest part is? He continued. I sleep better in here than I have in years. No more lies to keep track of, no more schemes to manage. Just the truth. Finally. That's not why you called. No, I called because I owed you something I never gave you when it mattered. An apology. Not for the investigation or the consequences, I deserve those, but for that day in the boardroom, for reducing 12 years of brilliant work to a punchline, for making you feel like you didn't matter when you were the only one in that room who actually did. I stood at my window, phone pressed to my ear, watching the city wake up. Somewhere out there, Northbridge's headquarters stood half empty, a monument to corporate hubris. The company had filed for bankruptcy 2 days ago. The FBI agent who interviewed me, Victor continued. She said something interesting. Said the scope of what you documented, the precision of it, the patience it must have taken, she'd never seen anything like it. Said you could have had a career in federal investigation. I had a career. You ended it with a joke. No, Amelia. I revealed it. You were never meant to be analyzing spreadsheets for men who couldn't understand them. You were meant to hold people accountable, and you did. Is that supposed to make me feel better? It's supposed to be the truth, something I should have recognized years ago. Another pause. In the background, I heard a guard announcing the end of phone time. I have to go, Victor said. But Amelia, that word you said to me, federal, when I called you that last time, it wasn't just about the investigation, was it? No. It was about power. Real power. Not the kind that comes from titles or corner offices, but the kind that comes from truth, from consequences, from justice. Goodbye, Victor. Goodbye, Amelia. And thank you. For what? For being exactly what I said you were. Decoration, beautiful, overlooked, and ultimately, the thing that made everything else look exactly as worthless as it really was. The line went dead. I set down my phone and made myself coffee. 2 sugars, no cream. The same as every morning since I'd left Northbridge. But this morning felt different. Final. My laptop chimed with an email from Claire. The subject line read, "It's over." Inside was a single line. Last defendant took a plea. Case closed, dinner Sunday. I typed back, "My place, I'll cook." As I closed the laptop, my phone buzzed with a news alert. Sarah Morgan's final piece on the Northbridge collapse had just published. The headline read, "The decoration that brought down an empire. How one woman's silence spoke louder than Wall Street's roar." I didn't read it. I didn't need to. I'd lived it. Instead, I turned to my plants. The orchids that had witnessed my transformation from corporate analyst to whistleblower to whatever I was now. They were thriving, their roots strong, their blooms defiant and beautiful. The morning sun climbed higher, flooding my apartment with light. Somewhere, Victor was facing his first of many years in federal prison. Richard Blackwood was negotiating a plea deal that would strip him of everything. The Northbridge building would soon bear a different name, house a different company, one that might have learned from its predecessor's mistakes. But here, in my small apartment with its thriving plants and hard-won peace, I was exactly where I needed to be. Not decoration, not anymore. Just Amelia Rhodes, who had learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can be is underestimated. The city hummed its morning song outside my window. Life went on. New corporations would rise. New victors would emerge. New decorations would be designated and dismissed. But they'd better be careful, because some decorations have thorns, some have roots that run deep and wide, and some, when you're not paying attention, are quietly documenting everything, waiting for the perfect moment to remind you that pretty things can be powerful things. And power, real power, doesn't announce itself with titles or corner offices. Sometimes it just sits quietly in the corner, taking notes, until the day it decides to bloom. Thank you for listening to this story of corporate justice and sweet revenge. Where are you listening from today? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this tale of how one woman's patience became her greatest weapon, please subscribe to the channel and share what you would have done in Amelia's position. Your stories and reactions make this community special. Until next time, remember, never underestimate the quiet ones.